Hi everyone. Wow, tone shift. I read those two Samurai Jack comics today. I'm just trying to get through my big pile of comics. I'm not going to make videos about all of them. I promised myself I wouldn't make a video unless I came to the comic and said, "Wow, things are buzzing." And I got another one. And this like feeds into what I just talked about with Samurai Jack as kind of a pro counterpoint to the cons of the Samurai Jack comic. So, Darkwing Duck, I just picked up a bunch of comics of characters I'm interested in. So, Darkwing Duck, DuckTales, Samurai Jack. So, I was coming in with low expectations because I thought this would be IDW like uh, DuckTales is, but it's by Joe Books Limited, and I've seen them publish like a few Zootopia comics. I don't know too much about them. It just seems like kind of just a small dinky company that gets these licenses, but whatever. Okay, I am gonna warmly recommend this to fans of the show. I don't know if I can recommend this comic if you are not a fan of the show, but now I'm thinking about the show and how this comic successfully evokes the idea of the show. And one of the things I'm thinking about is my love of cheesy stories. And when I think of camp, the the thing that pops into my mind, apart from kind of old melodramas with Snidely Whiplash type characters, is Adam West's Batman, and uh, I've got what I think is an interesting contrast between the Darkwing Duck character, Batman in general, and the Adam West Batman. So when I was 5 years old, the Adam West Batman show seemed cool because I liked Batman and thought Batman was cool. And I didn't understand the camp humor of Adam West Batman. He seemed like an awesome, heroic action character, and the fights with the big sound effects seemed like cool fights. And then you reach this age, maybe about 12 or 13, where you start picking up, hey, Batman's kind of got a bit of a gut on him. Why are they doing this weird music for it? And you kind of start picking up that it's making fun of Batman. A lot of people hate Adam West Batman because of that. I never hated Adam West Batman. I think I just started liking other versions of Batman better than Adam West, like the animated series. And then I came back to Adam West when I developed that sense of humor to understand uh, camp camp humor, and then I loved it again. But you can never go back to that childlike moment where you actually believe Adam West Batman is a big action star kind of character. But Darkwing Duck is different. What I'm thinking about with Darkwing Duck is when I was a little kid, when I was about 6, I thought of Darkwing Duck as a funny character that I would laugh while watching it, and as a cool superhero character, and I didn't see a tension between those. And then years pass, the DVDs come out. I don't know if I was in high school or college when those came out, but I watch it again as a young adult, and I still have that strong impression that he is a humorous character who you laugh out loud watching him, and he is actually a heroic character in his own right. Not in spite of the humor, maybe even because of the humor. He it's almost like he's accidentally a good hero and a better hero than half of the SJW Marvel heroes, because by making him somewhat clownish, they actually put him behind the 8 ball a lot. And even though most of the cartoon episodes are, kind of like, cartoon villain, hilarious hijinks, there were some episodes at least where it felt like there were real stakes and like he might actually die doing this stuff, and you cared about him as a guy who felt like a real father for Goslin, and Goslin felt like a real spunky little girl. And especially like those Taurus Bulba episodes, who was kind of in the pilot of the show and would appear later, it felt like Darkwing Duck might really die in these kind of Disney cartoon stories, and you were invested in him. And boy, I'm gonna go dig up those DVDs. There are some things in this that I felt went over my head because I never got the third volume, if they ever made a third volume. But I did watch some of it as a kid, and I watched all of the Volume 1 and Volume 2 box sets, and I love this character. He has strength. He is a one-dimensional character where he creates a strong impression on you by how boisterous and over the top he is, and the slapstick humor that happens to him because he's a little bit too full of himself and he's a little too overly dramatic. But he has a heroic heart to him that gives him more depth than just the initial kind of bam in your face impression of him. He actually is a heroic character. It's incredible. The quality of this comic is okay. They are when I read Don Rosa's introduction, he talked about having a big. He photocopied all of his Scrooge McDuck comics so that he could have a reference library of how Carl Barks drew Scrooge McDuck, and he used that to construct comics since he said he didn't know how to draw. He did draw a little before drawing Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck, but he kind of he chose a way of working which helped him go from a really rough style to, I think, making really strong work. He punched above his weight class in it when he drew Donald Duck stories. So this is an artist who seems to be using similar techniques of having a big reference library of Darkwing Duck poses and expressions to copy from. I sense that in the style, and there are times where it's a little bit weaker, but it's okay. You know, it's not reaching like this like ultimate level of beauty where I'd say, oh, go get this comic even if you don't like the character, but it is successfully evoking the idea of the show, and there are strong passages. So I think this dude at the front is kind of a weak passage, but we're going to see some strengths. I don't know exactly what storytellers means. I've taken that to mean that it's two artists who share both writing and artistic duties in some fashion, right? So one may sketch out the basic idea, and then the second comes in and polishes it. But I'm not sure if you have more technical knowledge of that, help me out a bit. But I took that to mean that both have a hand in both the visual pacing of the story and the plot of the story itself. So pacing. Let's see what happens. Okay, so guy, dog character introduces some parade. Look at this. It's not wasting my time. The parade is flying. Darkwing Duck looks silly, and his expression is great. And there's this action line as he's stretched on this, and we feel the speed of the float. Launchpad. It's not exactly like 100% on model for the Disney characters, but man, they didn't waste my time. This feels like something I would have seen in the show happening, and it's a great punch opening. One influential moment in my life, unfortunately I've forgotten the artist's name, but I went to a Midwest anime convention, and this was an artist who worked for DC Comics and drew Batman and Robin at some point, and then he went to Disney, and his story was going into Disney, the TV Disney studio that made Darkwing Duck. He worked on Darkwing Duck, and his story was that he thought by drawing Batman and Robin, he was ready for anything, right? He thought, oh, I can draw a duck. If I can draw Batman, I can draw a duck. And then he told the story of how he'd end up kind of crying on the floor based on how tough his bosses were and how they would redline his work, and they would be blunt. So they would draw a red line over his duck bill and just write "wrong" in big letters. And it's tough. You might think that the Disney style is simple to emulate because it's a simple cartoon style, but it's an elegantly simple style where if you don't get it exactly right, it's obvious you haven't gotten it exactly right. And even the 90s cartoon Disney studios, that wasn't the same as the movie studios making Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and The Little Mermaid, but they still had a high standard of quality that might surprise someone coming out of a different artistic field. So there are weak moments of this. Like, this is an artist where I feel like they get redlined if they were at Disney a lot, but they are still evoking the idea of the show, and they are still showing strengths early on to grab my interest. Yeah. Now, as I was reading this, just like Samurai Jack, I was reading the Samurai Jack comic and thinking, oh man, I wish I was reading Samurai Jack. I wish I was reading Samurai Jack. I was reading this and enjoying it and just so relieved from Samurai Jack, but there were points where I phased out a little bit, and I was still thinking, man, I'd like to watch that show again. So I don't know if that was me just because of my mindset from what I just read, or if maybe that might be a pacing issue in the comic where I wish this was just a little bit. This is much punchier than the Samurai Jack comic. I just am maybe wishing for a little bit more of that punch, but still pretty good. All right, so Darkwing Duck is fighting Megavolt, and there's this great action scene where they crash into the fountain and he's doing his alliteration. You have to read this in Jim Cummings' voice, the voice actor of Darkwing Duck, and I've been told I'm not that good at impressions and my throat's kind of tickling, so I'm not going to. Maybe I'll try to do Jim Cummings naturally because that's the most natural way to read Darkwing Duck, but just prepare yourself for cringe and roast me on my impressions. So I like this little visual gag that Launchpad has a note of things he would like to crash, and one of the things he would like to crash is the city. He's checked that off. So I legitimately laughed several times while reading this comic. And okay, then this is a great transition, right? So action scene to Darkwing as a dad, and this is the other element of the character that they would show in almost every episode. And in the pilot, I never watched the pilot as a kid. I didn't get to watch the origin story of Darkwing Duck until I was a young adult. But throughout, you knew that Goslin was. I don't know how I knew that Goslin was his adopted daughter when I watched the show. Maybe it was just mentioned briefly in certain episodes, apart from the pilot episode. But she always felt like a real daughter. He felt like a real dad. I liked that she called him dad, and she respected him as dad in her own way, even though she'd get into trouble. He's not a Homer Simpson type character. Boy, I've just seen a lot ever since like 2016. It's like I started paying attention to Twitter. It's like I've noticed a lot more people talking about media and the politics of media. But when I was a little kid, I kind of noticed that Homer Simpson was sort of a jackass type of character. Like I'd never want to be perceived as a Homer Simpson. And so then there was this whole idea in like the MRA and MGTOW community that people don't want to sacrifice and go through a lot of garbage to be Homer Simpson. That's not an image of manhood that people like. And so there's an aspect to Darkwing Duck that when he's Drake Mallard, he's kind of a, befuddled dad type of character. Maybe his hair is falling out. He's got a goofy sweater. But I have never read the character of Drake Mallard as goofy idiot dad who no one respects. He is a bit behind the eight ball, and that comes from his own character flaw of being a little bit too full of himself and a little too overdramatic. But Goslin actually shows respect for her dad, even though she's a bit of a troublemaker, spitfire little tomboy who gets in trouble. And that's always impressed me about this show, even when I came back to it as an adult. It felt like he is being treated with respect, even when he is the comedic character and he's the butt of some of these jokes. All of this feels like something that could have been right out of the show. He's got his crazy expression. I don't know the voice actor of these characters, but I can hear their voices in my head, and these are the types of things they said. So the scripters are paying attention to how those episodes were constructed, how the characters were written, to create that, to help jog my memory and remind me of what they sound like and how they act. And I just love that expression, right? We need funny drawings. Squirrel Girl can't be funny just based on teehee millennial humor. She has to look funny, and ugly isn't the same as funny. This isn't the strongest Disney-esque drawing I've ever seen, but it is funny Disney-esque drawing, and I am laughing while reading this, and the dialogue is supporting the visual humor. All right, so what's going on? I gotta skip a little bit. This is where I felt like it was starting to get a little slow. Like they're going on a class field trip to a maximum security prison, and this is where I feel like they might have been stretching a bit to try to get it to the cliffhanger at the end. So this is where I would have added the punch. Someone help me out. They do a little like editor's box mentioning that this little cat character was a villain called Cat Tankerus, and he was in jail. I don't know if they are doing a bit like they're saying, tee-hee, here's a supervillain who you've never heard of, or if this was actually a character in the show. If they've never released the third season on DVD, I'm just going to have to go find a way I can watch the rest of this show somehow, because this holds up. This isn't just nostalgia talking. It's a comedic Disney cartoon, Warner Brothers type of character, but they are adding just go read that Don Rosa introduction where he talks about the distinction he saw between the kind of Warner Brothers style of characters where Bugs Bunny is a rabbit and the Disney Scrooge McDuck type of characters where Scrooge McDuck feels like a human being who just happens to be drawn like a duck. Darkwing Duck feels like a human being. Goslin Mallard feels like a human being, but they just happen to be ducks in this world. And some of these characters, I'm sure, were made up just for this comic, kind of as joke villains. One Shot, he's a joke on Deadshot. He can hit anything with deadly accuracy, but he can only do it once. Negaduck, he was voiced by Jim Cummings too, and Jim Cummings would just add a little bit more evil to his voice while doing it. And he comes off as kind of his, psychopathic serial killer stuff who has no respect for Darkwing Duck. And there's a great setup for Darkwing Duck. He always gets a dramatic entrance, and just when he's, looking cool and awesome, then something happens that, Darkwing is the victim of the physical comedy because Darkwing Duck is too full of himself. And even when I was a little kid, in the theme song, they have one of the lines is "Master of Surprise," and he's getting hit by a rolling pin. You don't need to be old enough to understand irony to think Darkwing Duck getting hit by a rolling pin in the theme song and making a silly face is hilarious. And then you get a little older and you understand dramatic irony, and then it adds a layer of humor to that. But it's not a humor that's saying, he sucks, let's all laugh at how much he sucks. It's humor, it's physical humor that's set up by his character flaw. But for almost all that show, he feels heroic, and he feels like a genuine hero. He feels like he's capturing the best elements of Batman. This show was probably made as a response to Batman, the animated series. Darkwing Duck is capturing both the cartooniness of a character like Batman and some of the gravitas of a character like Batman in a 30-minute, silly adventure story cartoon format. They're evoking deeper ideas than you would expect of the format. All right, so here's where I'm talking about it. So Negaduck's plan is to lock down the facility. He's not doing a jailbreak. He has locked the doors and opened up the cells, and Darkwing Duck is trapped in an impregnable prison with his entire rogues gallery. And then Negaduck gives us the setup. He says, okay, this is supposed to be escape-proof, so I'll give you 30 minutes. Guy with a clock for a head, what? And I'll give you 30 minutes, and then we're coming. The clock's ticking, Darkwing. Run. Look at that. Yes! Yes! This is a cartoon duck character, but they are creating tension and drama for the character, and it feels real because we've had an opportunity to see him as a loving but kind of blustered dad. And oh, what a great setup. Now, this would have been like the 15-minute mark in a TV episode where there'd be the commercial break and then you'd come back and see the resolution. I almost wish they would have condensed this enough to get the whole story into one issue. But the pacing felt like the pacing of an episode of the TV show. It might have benefited from even increasing the pacing a bit from a TV show. I consider this to be a very successful example of adapting one type of thing into a new media and capturing the spirit and the heart of that media. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to go read more. I needed this after that horrible Samurai Jack comic. They're even doing a thing. I've not watched Gravity Falls. It's on that long list of things I know I should watch sooner or later because I've heard really good things about this. They gave me just a little, tease of it. I've roasted this kind of hyper simplified cartoon style before, but there's a lot of sunlight and good color in the background, so I have a feeling I'm really gonna like Gravity Falls when I finally get around to watching it. But dug it. A character with heart, and a character with a lot more actual heroism as a comedic character than most of what I've been reading from Marvel this year, because they put him in situations where he has to fight his way out, and you feel like, how the heck is he going to get out of this one? He's not winning automatically. He's fighting for it. And as a comedic character, even as a comedic character, he still comes off as cool. We need to feel like the character is cool. Yeah, boy. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Why don't you like, comment, and subscribe. Catch you later.